bless you. Okay, Miss Kindia Riley. Kindia is a graduate student at the University of Virginia. Currently, she has her BS in chemistry and her BA in anthropology. She is pursuing her master's in education and developing research on inclusion and displacement of children with incarcerated family members within the educational system. Since the age of 2, both of her parents have been incarcerated within federal prison, serving life sentences. Therefore, in addition to her studies, Kindia is an advocate and mentor for children with incarcerated parents and is working towards an end to mass incarceration so that children will not have to endure the traumatic loss of a parent. Miss Bree. Miss Bree Anderson is co-founder of Daughters Beyond Incarceration. She is the daughter of Robert Jones. Robert was sentenced to life without parole and was freed in November 2015 after 23 years of incarceration and exonerated in January 2017 by the Innocence Project of New Orleans. Bree was born while Robert was awaiting trial and locked up. She spent 23 years of her life with her dad behind bars. Robrisha defies society's stereotype of a child with an incarcerated parent in many ways, including by being an active member of IPNO's Young Professional Committee. IPNO, the nonprofit law office that exonerated Robert, frees innocent life sentence prisoners, supports their clients living well and fully in the world after their release, and advocates for sensible criminal justice policies that reduce wrongful convictions. Let's welcome Bree. And last but not least, Miss Ebony Underwood. Ebony is the founder and CEO of We Got Us Now. She is a social entrepreneur, a filmmaker, and Soros Justice Fellow, leading a powerful movement built by, led by, and for children of incarcerated parents in an effort to create greater awareness about the issue of parental incarceration and the rippling effects of mass incarceration. Ebony's interest in this advocacy work is personal and pivotal. As a daughter of an incarcerated parent, Ebony was traumatized and emotionally devastated by her father's harsh mandatory minimum sentence of life without parole. For 25 years, she suffered silently with the shame and despair she felt. In 2014, Ebony found her voice and began to speak publicly, sharing her story through film, television, and social media advocacy. In an effort to gain presidential clemency for her dad, she directed and produced a documentary short, #Hope for Father's Day, started a petition with over 70,000 supporters, and developed the website www.inprison.net about her family's ordeal. As a social entrepreneur, Ebony is a leading voice on the issue of children impacted by parental incarceration, speaking nationally at Yale Law School, Columbia Law School, NYU, American, John Jay, Sing Sing State, and Google New York and DC. She has published op-ed articles in the HuffPost, Vibe, and Mike, and spearheaded the Google-initiated digital #Love Letters campaign to demonstrate the unbreakable bond between a child and their incarcerated parent on Mother's and Father's Day. Ebony is a herald voice championing for the millions of children impacted by parental incarceration. Thank you. Welcome. So, I think we wanted to start out by just getting a sense of, your bios speak to this a little bit, and there's no order here. We really just want this to be a conversation. But if you can just start by telling us how incarceration has impacted your life from the time that you were a child until now.
So people talk about how their lives have been impacted based on experience. Well, my whole life has been impacted by incarceration because I've never had the opportunity to celebrate a birthday with my biological father. I've never been able to wake up and say, "Good morning, Dad," or "Good night, Dad," or, "You know what, Daddy, can we go for a walk?" That has never been the case. If I wanted to walk with my dad, it would be in Angola's main penitentiary visiting area. And then you think about all of the drugs that I grew up around, the gunshots, the violence, and just the family dynamic. So incarceration has definitely impacted my life for 36 years, and I'm 36 years old.
Incarceration has impacted my life because my mom was pregnant with me when my father went in prison. He served 23 and a half years in Angola State Penitentiary and was recently exonerated about 2 years ago. And that was my first time seeing him outside of prison. So the cycle reversed because everything he didn't get an opportunity to teach me when I was a child, I had to show him while he an adult. So that impacted me a lot because it kind of took away my childhood and made me take the initiative to start working at the age of 14 to help my mother provide for my younger siblings.
Wow. So I just want to say thank you to Operation Restoration for inviting me to be here. This is really, really powerful. It's incredible to be here amongst these young women. I would say that parental incarceration has impacted my life because I guess I'm fortunate in the fact that I was able to spend some quality time with my dad. And then when he was taken away, as I say, it devastated me. So, you know, the commonality I see between us is the fact that no matter if you had a relationship or not, you know, parental incarceration, I mean, a relationship where you were on the outside with them, it impacts you. It's this ambiguous loss that we all share, regardless of how we've been impacted. And that's probably what propelled me. That's probably what propelled me most to be able to do this work around parental incarceration.
Hello.
Yeah.
So I say that it's in fact impacted me in a way that it's sort of like a catalyst for my life. It's literally a trajectory for all of us. It brought me to a point that I would have never been in if my parents weren't in prison. So it's given me endless opportunities. Of course, there's this negative, just traumatizing aspect of it, but I've never had an opportunity to spend with my father or mother, like at a birthday or graduation or any type of celebration as so. So I believe that for better and for worse, just the situation that they're in has impacted me in a way that it's showed me different avenues and things to be grateful for outside of what people may take for granted. So.
Thank you. So you all talk about your parents being incarcerated as not just a situation you're in, but a lived reality, right? And I think what we are also curious to hear more about is what are some of the strategies, some of the people that came into your life, some of the coping mechanisms that you all use to find that strength to be able to not only live in that reality, but then use it in a way towards trying to move the needle on this issue. So what were some of those strategies that you used, or coping mechanisms?
I would say, for me, some of the strategies just growing up as a teenager was laughter, music, art. Hip-hop music for me was the thing that literally changed the trajectory of my life. I was devastated by the fact that my father was incarcerated and was acting out, but music was the thing that kind of kept me stable, I guess, and okay. I eventually went into the music business. I worked in the music industry. It was like my passion, my love. My father worked in the music industry, so following along in his footsteps. But then what actually made me go out and speak publicly was the fact that I felt like I could potentially help him during the Obama administration. So Obama decided that he wanted to reform the criminal justice system and was just like, you know what, we're going to right out all those wrongs. My father was sentenced under the war on drugs, and he has a life without parole sentence for drug conspiracy charges. No drugs ever found, no phone calls ever found, no nothing, but someone saying that, you know, when he did this crime. All that to say, yeah, I wore it on my sleeve very, you know, openly and really, really went all out because my father never stopped being a dad. So I felt like, you know what, that's the least that I can do. Although I haven't shared this publicly, I'm going to do that now and share. And in the midst of doing that, and speaking around the country, I met so many people that would come up to me and tap me on my shoulder or come up to me after I spoke and say, thank you so much for sharing. I never had the courage to share. I have the same story. And I was like, oh my God. I mean, every single time. And so I just was like, wow, this is way greater than my own personal story. We were living in a bubble. I never even thought about other children or young adults that have been impacted. And I'm like, wow, yeah, I got to do something. I got to say something. So that's why I started We Got Us Now. But yeah, that's literally, those are the things that help me.
I'd say for me, well, when I was growing up, I was staying with my maternal grandparents at the time, and I didn't know that my parents were in prison until I was around 6 or 7, and my grandparents told me that my parents were working undercover for the government in a federal prison. So when they called and I would hear, oh, this is a call from a federal prison, and it would be my mom, it was always this story of where they were and what they were doing that day undercover. So I think for a long time it was very hidden for me, and I really didn't have that perspective to understand it. And then I got bullied in early elementary on the bus, and one of the kids was like, well, your mom's in jail. And it didn't really register. And then I went home and I was explaining it, and that was like the sit down moment for my grandmother to say, okay, now it's time to have this conversation. And from that point forward, it was like, since I already had a story, I couldn't really comprehend it. And then over time, I just became numb to it, and I didn't realize that it was an issue until I got older and got the opportunity to speak out about it. And at that moment, that was sort of like a release for me, because I had so much stuff built up and repressed in my mind, and I didn't even realize it was an issue. And as a child, I didn't realize, oh, it's my birthday, my mom's calling me because she's at work and she's not here. So it was always sort of like a coping mechanism for me to always build it in the back of my mind. But speaking out helps you get past it. Understanding that talking about it and letting it out will get you very far. And even with that, visualizing what your parents think you are and doing that, and then visualizing and letting other people know who your parents are, even though they're behind bars. Because people will come up to you and let you know, like, oh, I work with your dad, or I work with your mom, and you'll learn all of this stuff through other people about your parents just by you talking about them.
For me, I would say the coping mechanisms were that I ran. Growing up, I was extremely fast. I got a track scholarship to Alabama State after graduating from Warren Easton, and there were times where I would run at a track meet, and I honestly imagined my dad waiting at the finish line after every race. If he wasn't at the finish line, in my head, he was on the field. And that's because after every meet, he would call on Sundays, and he would already know. Well, I didn't know that they would actually be able to get the paper, and he was able to keep track of my stats and how well I did. But that made me feel proud, is that he would kind of coach me from prison. But when it got to a point to where I had started asking questions and people were still not telling me the truth, I lashed out. And so I fought. Like, I even had a fight in the principal's office because I was tired of running and doing good, but I'm not getting any responses about where my dad is. But it feels good to be alongside with you ladies hearing the same thing and understanding that it helps to write. I have a friend that I met at the Public Defenders who kind of helped me to write the article that I published in Loyola Law Review, and it took me at least 6 months to write 8 pages because I never thought that reliving those memories would hurt as much as they did, but they do. But it feels so good because now when I speak, I don't cry as often, unless I'm with Dolphinette. But otherwise, it's easier for me to speak about these instances.
Coping for me, I think I wrote a lot since I was a child, and which I still do. Like, when I think about something, I write about it more than I probably will talk about it. And I remember one day my junior year, I was in the English class, and Miss Demerits, so we were sitting in a circle. She was like, we have a writing assignment, because it was my turn to pick the assignment. So we started this group. I started this group in her class, and we started doing it like every week. So this one week we had a guest speaker, and he said he started doing the sessions at 35. So I was like, well, we're gonna bring it to Easton, and we're gonna do it every week. So he was describing a story about one of his friends who was incarcerated, and he was wrongfully convicted. So nobody was paying attention to the story, but I was all in it. He's like, you really paying attention to this story? But I'm like, yeah. But I didn't tell him because I could relate to it. Only two of my friends really knew my father was in prison. So I listened to the story. He described that the guy, how long he was in prison, how many kids he had, and by the end of the story, he went detail to detail. At the end of the story, he said he had a daughter that went to Warren Easton, that was in 11th grade, and the whole time he was talking about me. So he never said the name, so after the class was almost over, I was like, hey, I can talk to you? And he was like, what's going on? I was like, my name is Risha Anderson. He was like, oh my God, he's just right there. So he gave me some pictures I think my dad had for me, and I said, hold on, let me write something right quick. So I hurried up and wrote something fast so he could give it to him, because I think he was going to be able to see him before I did.
Amazing. Yeah, I'm struck by the diversity of the ways that you each, there's some common themes, right? It seems like expression and being able to talk about it and find community by talking about it is really important, was an important tool for all of you. But then also we have our own things that we lean into, and I think we all have this, whether we go towards athletics or towards music or towards those things that we know are going to make us kind of whole. So I guess if you bringing the conversation to more of a system level, because each of you are doing work to impact the system. You're taking your stories and you're using it to make some change. What's one or two, you don't have to stick to just one, recommendation that you might make around our justice system? If there's one thing that you could really push for and get people to rally behind, what would that change be?
And man, I wish I knew about formerly incarcerated people when I was growing up. I think I told Dolphin the other day, I should have met you when I was 16. That you need to have people who have been directly impacted by incarceration. They need to be surrounded around like-minded individuals. They need a therapist or a mentor or somebody that can actually help them go through or explain the feelings that they're feeling. There was no way that I should have graduated from Warren Easton as the fastest girl in the state in the 400 and not get past that hurdle of actually finishing college with track because I broke the communication barrier, broke the team between my father and I. Because I didn't understand how someone that's incarcerated thinks. I mean, my dad told me for 16 years, I'm coming home soon. Well, in my mind, I felt like you're lying. In 16 years, why are you still telling me the same thing? And so I lashed out at him. And we didn't even talk my college careers. And so I stopped running track and I just graduated. But the joy that I had when running, that was gone. And it wasn't until I surrounded myself with people who understood how a person thinks when they're incarcerated, that I actually had to that I actually was able to think that they can't accept their sentence because they have to stay hopeful and they have to believe that they are coming home. And then it's difficult for a guy to tell his daughter, well, I'm being accused for rape, I'm being accused for robbery, or I'm being accused for murder. That's hard.
So the question is, one recommendation that you would make to the justice system, and it could be something that, that is more of a policy tool, or it could just be something that, a recommendation around we need more mental health resources and community built up around these things, right?
So I think retroactivity is like a petty thing. Just looking back and seeing what laws and what's legal now that wasn't legal back then, and considering now, okay, let's go and recap over these cases and maybe going and reading through and saying, okay, well, what about their life at home? Because I know a lot of times my mom, I had a sister who was, she had cerebral palsy, and a lot of times my mom will put in for compassionate release. And just to go back and have a judge look at certain cases and say, okay, well, maybe I have a child at home, I have children at home, and just to go back and go over that with them to see if they can reduce their sentence, or see if they can make some sort of clauses or adjustments so the children can come in and it won't be just you looking at your father from a distance or not being able to touch them for over 30 seconds or hug them for longer than a specific time, and just all the hurdles of visitation and so forth. And just that consideration of the children and what's left behind when they do go to prison.
Right. So I would echo both of you. You both brought up very valid points. The fact of community and understanding. Dominique brought up, which Candia brought up earlier, just like meeting people that, and even you, Risha, brought up the fact that you would meet. I've met people that had a relationship with my dad, like longer than I've had, and for me that wasn't happy. Like that, I mean, it was nice at first, but then I'd kind of be upset, like,
Yeah.
you know, I don't really want to know. Like,
that's how I met Bree's dad. Bree's dad and my dad were in the same institution. And so when he was released, I didn't like him. I think I walked up to Bree and told her, I don't like your dad. And he was released and started working at the same place where I was working.
See, yeah, those types of things. So that's why I'm so happy to meet them. You don't even understand. Like, we can know each other. But like, to meet you all, it's like, wow. It's like community is so important. Like, we need community. Candia touched on the policy aspect, which impacts our parents who are in federal prison. Yes, the lack of retroactivity, oh my God. Everybody just goes for the low-hanging fruit. And there are thousands of prisoners that are now elderly or about to become elderly because of the lack of retroactivity in the law. So my father was 33 years old when he's incarcerated. He's about to be 65. I mean, he's old now. He's older. So it's like, yeah, why are we still incarcerating these people? You age out of criminality. He was a teenager when he was selling drugs. It's like, okay, hello. He's been an incredible model prisoner. It's time to change those policies. So I echo everything that everyone has said here. Community first, so I think community is first and foremost. So happy to see all y'all in the room. So happy to see all of y'all.
I agree with all three of y'all, and also about changing the fact that when a mother or father go to prison, their parental rights shouldn't be taken away from them. Like in school, if my mom knew what's going on, if my father in prison, he should know what's going on too. He should be able to set up a call to talk to a teacher or have a conference system.
So when I just echoing that, when my parents, when they first went, I went with my grandparents. 2012, my grandfather passed away. Then 2015, it was my sister, and then my grandmother passed away 3 months later. So I was 17 and I was just living all by myself.
Wow.
So just to consider that and to think, what can the system do in a situation of my mom knows that I'm home by myself and that I have nobody else to rely on. What do you do? And what can they do to move us closer together? Because my mom was relying on my mother. My mom was relying on my grandmother to send her money. So when my grandmother had passed, I didn't have any money to send my mom to call me. So she was grieving, I was grieving, but we couldn't connect with each other because she had no money and I had no money either. So what could the system do about that to make sure that I'm not falling off or falling into the streets and all that sorts of stuff?
So, right, the economics, like it becomes now a financial relationship that she has to help hold with her mom in order to stay connected to her mom. That's ridiculous. Same with me with my dad. It's economics. Like, in order for me to stay connected to him, I have to send him money every month. It's horrible. It's an unnatural thing. We should not have to, and it's an unnatural thing to try to comprehend. Like, this is something that we should not have to go through. And had it not been for incarceration, we would never be impacted. We did nothing wrong. However, we are like branded with this, stigma because of someone else's incarceration, and it's really a horrific thing, and people need to hear more of our voices.
I like to call us the forgotten ones. We're the ones that society forgets about every time our parent or someone that's a parent becomes incarcerated. They just forget about the children.
So I've heard two kind of themes emerge there. One around the importance, again, of creating community, and then two around some really concrete policies and practices that we really need to be looking at that acknowledge and respect the connections that people who are incarcerated have to other family members outside of that system, and in your case, like in the most extreme circumstances, right? A follow-up question to that, and I think, it sounds like this is some of the work that Operation Restoration is taking on. I think probably some other folks here in this room, but I'm curious, in like your ideal vision of the world, what would creating that community look like? How does that get shaped? Who's at the table designing what that looks like? How can we create community for young people? Like, I just think about all the young people in our schools, that are going to school every day, being asked to sit there, control themselves, be ready to learn, be ready to absorb all this knowledge, carrying some of the things that you've described, that you're carrying. And so how do we create a community for them? What does that look like?
I mean, we put them at the table. We put the youth at the table with formerly incarcerated persons. You let formerly incarcerated persons lead it, because we can't tell you what it feels to be incarcerated, because I've never been incarcerated, but I can tell you what it feels like to be a daughter with an incarcerated parent. And so if you want a community-led organization, look at Operation Restoration. Everyone in that organization has been directly impacted by incarceration. And so the work that we're doing, it revolves around us, creating policies, creating change, reentry, transition, education, youth mentoring. Like, that's an ideal world on where and how people who have been directly impacted should operate. And if there's anything that you need, then they should be able to go to that world for assistance. But you can't create a community without them. And that's what I think is frustrating for the majority of us, is that we're considered without access.
Yeah, I would agree with her. Absolutely, community, absolutely bringing our voices to the table is essential. The purpose of creating We Got Us Now for me was the fact that I felt like the children and young adults, our voices need to be at the table in a strengths-focused way. Everything was always really negative. The stigma around if your parents incarcerated, you're more likely to become incarcerated. Everyone that I know that has had a parent that's incarcerated are super resilient. As a matter of fact, we end up being the parent-child. As a matter of fact, we succeed, and because of the stigma and the shame and the I guess the pressure of just having a parent incarcerated and not wanting to end up there as well, I think we achieve much higher than the average kid. We just have taken on a lot. So bringing our voices to the table, again, is essential. We Got Us Now is a national organization, so partnering and building a network with different organizations that are actually doing work to support children of incarcerated parents is huge. And so that's why I said yes, absolutely to come down here and join Operation Restoration and network with them, because Sarita has been a dear friend from the moment that we met at Columbia University. And from that moment on, we just stayed very connected. And I want to lift up her work, and she's always lifted up my work. And again, just build community and bring our voices collectively to the table so that people know the policies, are educated about how we are impacted, why we're impacted, how we're affected. I think that's first and foremost. It's essential.
So I think for us, it literally starts with us. As in, when we're going and we're in school, we have to not take the stigma of incarceration and let that kind of like submerge us. We have to actually break out of it and use it to either better ourselves or just get completely away from it and just do as if you're a normal person, not within those circumstances. So for me, I'm doing my research on inclusivity and displacement in elementary schools. So when I found out my parents were in prison, I sat down, I went to the classroom, I acted out. They tried to tell me I had a socio-emotional disorder. And my two options, which would happen under the pretense of I threatened my teacher. A cop came in and I was 7 years old. A cop came in and told me, that's a felony. They sat down with my grandparents and said, she either goes to special ed or she goes to a juvenile detention center. And it was one of two at 7. And just to think about, they're moving children like me to different areas or special ed where we don't belong, or moving us to detention centers where we become generationally impacted by it. So I sat down and said, okay. So I went through school, started going, studying cultures and such, and then went into education to see the policies behind it. What is being put into IEPs? What are being put into place in schools? And what are they thinking about? Because when my dean sat down with me, he said, why are you doing this? And I said, because if I act up and I'm bad, I can go to prison with my parents. And that was literally what pushed how many children are being talked to, what's being said to them to know where they're going. So it starts with us and making sure that we're talking to our children and talking around us and seeing what's happening to the people right next to us.
And listening to us, like you just said. I mean, you were acting out in the efforts of trying to find your voice or trying to be connected to your parents in some way. So I feel like it's so important for us to be heard and know that there's community, because we are submerged by this stigma. You know, it's not, they made a mistake. So you don't want to feel bad because you love your parent. Like, at the end of the day, we still love our parents, regardless. And then some of us are angry. I was angry for a long time at my dad. But you see, forever? Like, so forever? I mean, I got over being mad at him, so the government's mad at him forever? People deserve second chances, and people deserve to be connected to their family members.
Yeah. I think, you know, citywide, there's been, and I think nationally, a conversation that's finally being elevated around so much of what you've talked about, which is trauma. And there's been folks within the education system here, and then in some of our other systems looking at the impacts of trauma and how to address that root cause, and really, you know, lift the stigma and get these conversations out there. So, you know, I'm so grateful for each of your leadership and for speaking truth to that, because I think that that's so much of what educators and other people in our city who have been working on the, you know, front lines with young people in our schools and in our other systems, that just hasn't been named, you know, is that trauma. So I guess the last question, I think we just have time for one more, is if you could, since we talked a little bit about stigma, if you could talk about some of the misconceptions that you really worked to reverse around being a child with an incarcerated parent. If you could just talk a little bit about how what are some of those stigmas, and what do you want to tell this audience about knowing what that experience is like?
So one of the stigmas that I would always hear growing up, oh girl, you're gonna be just a druggie just like your dad. I'm like, first of all, how did you even know that? How did I know that? What if I didn't know my dad was a drug addict and you just told me? And second of all, I was fighting when I grew up. So what makes you think I'm not going to fight you? Just by based on what you're saying to me. So you coming to me, not knowing what my response and my reaction is going to be. But look at what you're telling me. Look at what you're saying to me. So you're going to be a little drug addict just like your dad. Or test tube baby. No. And so I stand proudly saying that I've never been on drugs, I've never been in prison, I've never been arrested. And to hear my dad say the other day, he was like, oh, I don't feel like such about myself because my daughter's out here doing good work. So that makes me feel proud.
So I've never had direct stigma. No one never told me nothing my dad did was wrong because everybody around me, my whole family, people say you look just like your daddy, and they told me that. Well, my mom, everybody knew that he didn't do the crime that he went to prison for, but the things I've heard when I attended school, or just hearing children say, or people say, people who have parents in prison or end up in prison, be pregnant as a teenager, or you're going to drop out of high school, you're not going to finish high school, and I'm here to say I didn't do any of those things, so that makes me proud.
The question is just, what is some of the stigma that's attached to being a child of an incarcerated parent, and how would you, what would you do to flip the script on that?
Well, I think I said it a little bit earlier, but I would just repeat and say that, if you have a parent that's incarcerated, like they both shared, we all share. We've never been incarcerated. There's this myth that if your parent is incarcerated, that you're more likely to end up incarcerated. I don't believe that, and I'm working to debunk that myth.
Yes.
Because I find it not to be true at all. And yeah, that's a huge one for me. But also, I mean, I think, again, I just have to say community. I know that's not the question, but I'm so happy about the community here. Operation Restoration, yes. I love this. I love to meet people. I mean, it's still like, it's still, for me, it's like a relief to share. Every time you share, if anybody in the room is a young person that's been impacted, or even if you're a young adult and you've never said anything, because I've had that happen to me, to be able to share is like literally like a relief. Like letting go of something that you may have held on to just because of fear. And to let go of that fear, to know that there's community, that in and of itself is so relieving. And so that, again, is why I created We Got Us Now. Because We Got Us Now is about us, for us, and will always be there for us. Built by, led by, and about children and young adults impacted by parental incarceration. And now these women are like my family, and now I have more community here in New Orleans. This is my first time here. So I'm from New York. I'm happy to know that there's community here with Operation Restoration and with these young ladies, and I'm excited to build community here as well. So they seem to be doing great work. I can't wait to uplift it. That's my goal, is to uplift this work.
I always say I'm not my mother's mistake and I'm not my father's mistake, because that's not who they were. Or that was who they were, but that's not who they are now, And as I got older, when I first went to college, I said, fine, they went to prison for doing drugs, I'll just go do drugs the right way. And I got my BS in chemistry, and I said, okay. And now I'm sitting back like, look at how that spun around. I said, okay, if they did it the wrong way, I'll show them that as their child, I can do it the right way. And it's always looking back and saying, okay, we are so positive. If you are impacted, your parents, cousins, brothers, they love you, and they look at you like, what if I could have done this? You are doing what I should have done. And you are literally a light for people that are in there and people that are outside too.
Can I ask just one little follow-up question?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm struck by, what, maybe just really briefly, if you can just each share, I know this is a big question, but, being among such an amazing group of women, I'm wondering what you think women specifically bring to this conversation in a way that is unique and important. Not to pit it against men, but what do women bring?
Everything.
I guess I was going to say innovation, the confidence and everything. And I mean, I think it's different for each woman. You have some women that bring resilience. You have some women that bring a different testimony, a different perspective, a different lens, a different view. Well, for me in New Orleans, this is my city. I grew up here, I lived here. This is New Orleans, and this is me. So there is no reason why, if you're considering children from incarcerated parents, I should be in there, because I know the city, I know the high school, I know what it takes to survive. So I think as a woman from New Orleans, I bring survival. Like I've survived growing up in the projects with a parent in prison, relatives on drugs. I know how to survive. So I think for me, I bring survival.
That's right.
For me, I think I bring strength, because through all the years, I'm 25, turning 26 on Christmas, and I don't even think my mom or my grandma or my sister, brother, nobody could say they ever saw me crying about my father being in prison, because I use it in a different way, writing and just taking initiative and playing a role where I know he's going to be straight, but I'm going to make sure me or my sister, my brother, they straight. So it's strength for me.
So I think I bring accountability to the table, because I feel like when we look back in retrospect, we were given and put in this position for a very specific reason. And if my parents were never incarcerated, I wouldn't be able to sit here and tell you guys, okay, you're gonna be fine. And I think that it makes us accountable for each other and for ourselves, so that we're not saying, okay, this can actually be me one day. Do I want to put my child through this? Do I want to put my relative through this? So I believe that I definitely bring that stance of you are in control of yourself and you are responsible for yourself and others around you that could be suffering from the same thing.
Okay, I'm ready. Y'all, if you would have asked me what I would be doing 5 years ago, I would have told you, and I was to tell you that I went to the White House 5 times, that I am in partnership with Google to produce a digital campaign, that I became a Soros Justice Fellow, that I'm speaking publicly on stage to an audience. Oh my God. 5 years ago, if you would have asked me this, I would have told you, and about my father and incarceration, I would have told you, no way. Who made up this lie? There's no way Ebony Underwood is doing any of that. So I would say this experience has, and as a woman and with women, and I'll speak for myself first, is purpose. Living in my purpose, knowing, seeking out why I ended up doing this, understanding that God put this on my heart so that I could be living in purpose, walking in purpose. And as I began to do this work, again, I'll say, I met beautiful Sarita, I met Dolphinette, I met Kendia, I met Topeka Sam, I met Andrea James, I met Nkechi Taifa, I met Miss Alice Johnson prior to her being in prison, and then after her getting out of prison. I met so many people, so many women, so many women. My father says, y'all got it. The women got it. We are a force to be reckoned with. There is no other power. This called Mother Earth. There's no other power stronger than a woman.
Yes.
Really.
Yes.
We're a force to be reckoned with. And we love our men. And let's not forget, we love our men. We need our men. We love our men as well. But there's no power greater than a woman.
All right.
Well, on that note, let's thank our panelists one more time.
So we're going to get ready for the second panel where we'll have our amazing young girls and some some people in the audience that are here too who are involved in working in the school system and dealing specifically with juveniles. So if you give us a couple of minutes, we're going to switch the chairs around and we'll be starting in T-minus 4 minutes. Okay? Thank this panel, you guys. Thank you.
Let's stop and we started.
Why don't we restart?
Okay, you want to stop, finish, and then I think my